My name is Sherry Lynn Faust Mims. I was born February 3rd, 1946 in Lexington, North Carolina.
How was your childhood? Did you have any interesting stories from growing up?
The first 14 years of my life were spent in a place called Silver Valley, which is in Davidson County. It's literally a crossroads between Highway 109 and Highway 64. I went to elementary school that was half a mile from my house. My most interesting story about elementary school is that between second and third grade, there was a bad thunderstorm and lightning struck the telephone in the bedroom where I slept because that was Daddy's office, and it also struck the elementary school where I attended and burned it to the ground. That fall we attended school in Denton, North Carolina, which was about a 30-minute bus ride away, and we were in a condemned high school building. The upper floors were condemned, but we were able to use the lower floors. And Hurricane Hazel came through. Back then, they weren't able to predict hurricanes days in advance like they do now. And all of a sudden, here was this big storm and flooding started, so they sent us home on the bus. And the rain was so bad that every time we came to a place in the road where water ran up under it in a culvert, somebody had to get out of the bus and make sure that the road was still there. When we got to the auditorium of the school that had burned down, which was still standing, those of us that could get home went home, but there were some that had to spend the night there because the roads to their homes were washed out.
Did you have to spend the night there? Or?
No, I lived half a mile away and Mother and Daddy could pick me up. Another interesting story from my childhood was I rode the school bus, and at that time high school students drove the bus. The bus stopped to let me off, my brother and my sister and me off, and my mother came running to the bus, and I told the bus driver he had to get out and kill a snake, and it was a black racer. And bless the young man's heart, he got out and killed the snake because my mother was scared to death.
How are your parents like? What did they have any interesting quirks or anything about them?
Not really. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was an outstanding seamstress. In fact, until I was in ninth grade, I had never had a bought dress. She had made all my clothes. Some of my earlier clothes were made from feed sacks because my grandparents, my dad's parents, lived on a farm, and the feed for the animals came in sacks with pretty patterns and pictures on them. So that's what some of my first clothes were made from. I have always loved to read, and I think my love of reading started very early. My grandmother Faust was a stop for the bookmobile, and twice a month we would all go to the bookmobile and pick out books. And the bookmobile would also leave books at my grandmother's house, and she had a bookcase in the entrance hall, and people could come out and check out books between stops for the bookmobile. And I just loved that. That was something I really enjoyed doing, was reading. And they lived on a farm. They had cows, milk cows, and had a pond where my grandmother loved to fish. I did not develop my grandmother's love of fishing. I just don't have that kind of patience.
For the books, is that part of the reason why you became a librarian? Because your grandmother basically ran the library out of her house?
You know, I really hadn't thought about it, but that's probably did contribute to it. I didn't become a librarian until the last 14 years of my teaching career. It was when I started my study of library science. Before then, I was I had 3 lives in education. The first one was I taught home economics for 1 semester, and then your granddaddy and I got married. I got a job teaching math at a high school because I had started out as a math major and had more math hours than anybody they'd interviewed. And then the next year I taught math and science at a junior high, and to major in home ec, you had to take a lot of science. I was 1 hour short of being certified in science, so they sent me to school to get that. And then the rest of my career was basically math and science that I taught until I became a librarian. And I do believe that my love of books and the library started then. But by the time I entered the library, technology was big, and that I inherited straight from my daddy. My daddy got his first computer when he was 60 years old and taught himself how to work on a computer. And all three of his children loved computers forever, and he got an Atari when he was in his 60s because he would come visit us, and my sons, Jacob's daddy and his brother, would be playing the Atari, and my daddy had such a good time he went home and got himself an Atari.
So I know you said that whenever you were younger, you used to say Aunt Lisa was a psychic, and then her daughter ended up being a psychic. Why do you say that she was a psychic?
There were two things that I three things I very vividly remember. The first one was when she was about 2.5, 3 years old. Our family went to Washington, D.C., and it was in the wintertime. And she and I were sharing a bed, and that morning when she woke up, she said, it's snowing. Well, she hadn't gotten out of bed to look at the window, and sure enough, there had been a big snowstorm, and there were about 6 inches of snow outside when we got up, and we had not heard the weather, didn't know anything about it. It was a shock to the family. Another thing that she dreamed was that my aunt and uncle who lived next door to us in Greensboro, home burned, and a night or two later, their motorhome that was parked in their garage burned, and it didn't burn the house down, but it did do considerable damage to the garage and of course the motorhome. The third thing was the people that had lived on the other side of us, other than my aunt and uncle, had moved away, and the family had been very close to that family. And Lisa got up and said, they're coming to visit today. And Mother said, well, no, we haven't heard from them in a year or two. And sure enough, that very day they came to visit. So she has had some psychic experiences.
So you believe she passed that down onto Christina? And
Yes,
that's why
I do.
she's a psychic?
I really do.
All right. I know you said that your dad used to own a trucking company before you moved to Greensboro. Whatever happened with the company?
Okay. My daddy and his brother owned Faust Brothers Trucking, and they hauled stone and asphalt for road construction. One of the things we would do as I was growing up, Daddy would have to figure jobs. And so on Sunday afternoons, we'd get in the car and ride so that he could figure mileage so he would know how to give a bid. When I was in 7th grade, the summer of between 6th grade and 7th grade, I believe it was. Don't think it was between 6th grade and 7th grade. One of Daddy's drivers went to sleep at the wheel, crossed the center line, and there was a head-on collision, and the driver was killed as well as the people in the car that he hit. And I don't know financially if my dad lost a lot of money. My dad and his brother lost all their money, or if they just didn't have the heart to own a trucking company any longer. But they sold it out to a company here in Greensboro. At that time it was called Thompson Other Paving Company. And the paving company decided they wanted to add a company to it that dealt in hauling the stone and the asphalt. And so they hired my daddy and my uncle to run it, and then we moved to Greensboro to live because that's where Daddy's job was. The year that Mother and Daddy were building the house, that March, it snowed every Wednesday. They had dug out the basement. They had the basement walls, blocks in, but they couldn't do anything because just as soon as they got ready to do something else, more snow would come. And we were out of school in the county where I lived at that point in time, Davidson County, for almost 3 whole weeks. So we went to school on some Saturdays.
You and Granddaddy met at Lutheridge. When did you start going to Lutheridge, and why?
I started going to Lutheridge when I finished 3rd grade. I'm Lutheran, and it was our church camp. And my first cousin and I started going, and I went every year for 1 week to camp from the time I was finished 3rd grade until I finished 12th grade. And it was in the mornings we would have some religious studies, some Bible studies, and then we would swim and play baseball and volleyball and all those and go to crafts and all those kind of fun things. And I just loved it, looked forward to it every summer. After my freshman and sophomore years in college, I worked for my daddy in the office doing paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But after my junior year in college, I applied and was able to get a job as a counselor at Lutheridge. I worked that summer, and then the next summer I went back, and that summer on the first night we were there, I heard a new counselor that I hadn't met say that he was from Greensboro, and I went over and introduced myself, and we started talking, and we knew all sorts of people in common, people that I had gone to college with at UNCG, he had gone to high school with. And we started talking. We walked to Vespers together, and we did orientation that week and gotten to know each other better. And we started dating then, and mid-July he asked me to marry him, and in December 21st of that year we got married. And some people thought that was a little fast, but after 48 years I think it's going to last.
Since you guys got married so quickly and people kind of like not almost judged you for it, did that involve any like hardships that were brought on from that quick marriage?
No, because one of the things, because we had met at Lutheridge, that implied that we had some very similar beliefs and values. And I knew when I met Bill that he was going into seminary. He also had just graduated from college. He graduated from UNC. And we shared a common belief system and common values. So our fast marriage really didn't cause any problems. We were very blessed and very lucky, very lucky.
Did you have any hardships before you had Dad, in between like your quick marriage and starting a family?
Well, we did. When we got married, I was teaching in Rowan County, and of course I had to give that job up to move to Columbia, South Carolina, where Bill was in seminary. We had $50 when we got married, and I didn't have a job. So here we were, newlyweds, and no money, and I interviewed very quickly for jobs. And the first job I interviewed in Columbia, they told me that they did not hire people who quit in the middle of their first year of teaching. It didn't matter that it was because I got married. But so that was a hardship that we endured. Basically, money was tight, and we had some very big blessings. When Bill was getting ready to go on internship, well, Lutheran pastors have to do a year of internship after their first 2 years of seminary, we were going to Jacksonville, Florida, and we didn't have enough money to hire a U-Haul to go to Jacksonville. We thought we had enough, but we found out because it was Florida that most the U-Hauls went to Florida but didn't come back home, so they charged extra money, and we were very concerned about it. Bill had been choir director at a Lutheran church in Lexington, South Carolina, and their parting gift to him was $50 as a thank you, and that paid for our U-Haul. God answered a prayer.
Do you have any like items or furniture that has been passed down in the family for a long period of time?
Yes, the table in my kitchen was my great-grandmother's table, and it was also in my grandmother's house. It has wooden pegs. It also has a place where somebody looked like an ice pick and made an umbrella in it. I also my husband has a woven blanket that we have hanging in our living room that was his great 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 grandmother's, and it has been passed down. It went to his grandfather. It went to his mother because she was the oldest child in the family. It went to Bill because he was the oldest child in the family. It will go to Jacob's daddy, and eventually it will end up with Jacob.
Do you have any like stories from Dad or Uncle Steven's youth that are kind of like funny or odd?
Well, because John was the oldest, Stephen, he was 2.5 to 3 when 2.5 when Stephen was born. And Stephen figured out by the time he was 10 months old, close to a year, that he could get John in trouble by just screaming like John was killing him. And so I would immediately say, John, quit what you're doing. And I would not necessarily be in the room. I wouldn't be in the room. Well, one day Stephen did that, and I just happened to be around the corner, and I saw John was doing nothing, but Stephen had figured out that early that that was how to get John in trouble.
So I know you lived like a bunch of different places through Granddaddy being a pastor and you being a teacher. Which was your favorite place to live and why?
The last place we lived was Newton, North Carolina, and that was definitely our favorite. We lived there 24 years. It was a small town. The people were very, very friendly. The church was a great and wonderful church. It was a church that had a lot of love to share with other people, and it shared with us, of course. And that's where John and Stephen went through high school, and they consider that their home because they did their high school years there.
If you could describe your life up to this point in one word, what would it be?
Have to be blessed.
Why is that?
Well, when I look back on my life, I think of all the things that I've experienced, all the blessings that I've had that God has given me. Bill and I laugh and say that he had never been to Luther Ridge. I was not supposed to go to Luther Ridge that summer, but changed my plans, and we ended up together. We laugh and say that God gave us to each other that summer. He has, during times when we've needed things, we've been able to see that he has blessed us with those things. And when you have 2 great sons and 5 wonderful grandchildren, what else can you say? We've been blessed.
All right. Thanks, Jeremiah.